Alright everybody, welcome to the channel, and if you're new to the channel, thanks for checking it out. What we got today is a crazy story from Alaska, from an area that the Native Americans called Devil Country. Yeah, you heard me right, Devil Country, because of the Bigfoots up there and how crazy they were. Now this was an area where in 1750, yeah, you heard me, 1750, there was a huge landslide that came down a mountain and literally just buried a village with about 500 Indians in it, so they call it Devil Country, also because of the creatures that inhabit the country. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get into the story. This is going to be a great one, so hold on to your hats. Let's do it. The spring of 1900 found 4 prospectors together in a shack at Wrangell, Alaska. All 4 were broke, as is usual with prospectors. As luck would have it, I was one of the 4. For reasons which will be quite obvious, I will just call the other 3 John, Charlie, and Fred. Charlie came into the shack one night in April, all excited, and said, "Fellas, I have been on the trail of an old Indian for the last month trying to get him to tell me where he picked up a piece of free gold quartz he is at his camp. I never said anything about it before because I wanted to get the story from him first, and today he spilled the beans, fellas. He told me to go up to Thomas Bay and camp on Patterson River on the right side, travel upriver for about 8 miles, and then turn to the high mountains. And after traveling about 1.5 miles, I would find a lake shaped like a half moon. Plenty of stone like I found on a slide there," he said. Well, of course, a prospector is ready to stampede on a whisper of gold, any place, and we were no exception to the rule. We all talked the matter over, and finally it was decided that we would run our faces for an outfit and send Charlie to look the prospect over. While he was gone, John, Fred, and myself would hustle work somewhere for another grub stake and pay off the old one. The forepart of May, Charlie loaded his outfit into a canoe and, having favorable weather, left Wrangell for Thomas Bay, which lies northwesterly about 50 miles. He had 3 months' supply, but was to come back any time sooner if he found anything. But if he didn't show up in that time, we were to put out a search for him. John and Fred took a contract to get out wood, and I got a job in the Wrangell sawmill. Things went along until the first part of June, when on a Sunday in the late afternoon, we all being home, and in walks Charlie, without a coat or hat and looking as if he had been through hell. He didn't give us any greeting whatever, just heaved a piece of quartz over into the corner of the room and said, "Give me something to eat. I'm all in and want to rest." The fellow looked at it, and after he had eaten, he turned in, and without telling us a thing about his trip. We picked up the piece of quartz, and say, boy, it was a pretty thing to look at for a prospector. It would just shot through with gold specks, just like a badly freckled-faced kid. Were we excited? I'll say we were. Just before dark, we walked down to the beach to bring Charlie's outfit, as he had come up to the shack with only that piece of quartz in his hand. But there wasn't a thing in his canoe except the oars. Not much sleep for us that night, but Charlie never stopped sawing wood. We had hard work getting Charlie up for breakfast the next morning, but when he did roll out, he just ate, borrowed a coat and hat, and left the house without saying a word, or even answering one question of the many put to him by us. All of us, being excited and feeling ourselves worth a fortune, did not go to work that day, but sat around the shack and passed the blamed piece of rock back and forth to each other while we talked and waited for Charlie to come back and make his report. Believe me, we were anxious to hear it. Along in the afternoon he came in and said, "Fellas, the SS Dringo will be on her way south early tomorrow morning. Can you give me enough money for my ticket to Seattle? I'm through with Alaska and never want to see it again. I'll tell you about my trip to Thomas Bay and where I found the quartz, but my advice to you is to forget about it. It will never do you any good and will only cause you a lot of mental and physical pain. If we were not partners, I would never open my lips about this trip or what I found. But if you promise never to mention my name in connection with what I tell you, or mention the name of Thomas Bay to me again, I'll give you the straight of my experience up there. Judge for yourselves as to my saneness, because this is the most astounding thing you have ever heard, and as far as I am concerned, is beyond me to reason it out. Don't ask any questions to prolong my story any longer than it takes to tell it, as I want to leave Alaska and forget it if I can. I will try to make the one telling plain enough. This is Charlie's story. The first night after leaving Wrangell found me in Ideal Cove. Next night I reached Muddy River in time to make camp again. The third night I hit Ruth Island in Thomas Bay. I spent the next day looking up Patterson River for a suitable place for a good camp, which I found a quarter of a mile up from Tidewater on the right-hand side, looking up the river. Broke camp on Ruth Island the next day and moved up to the place I picked out the day before, put up my tent, packed up my outfit, and left the canoe on its riverbank. The next day I spent cooking beans, cutting wood, and making things comfortable for a long stay. As it looked like rain, I wanted to get things fixed to keep dry. It started to rain that night, and it just kept up for days. I lost track of time, as each day was just like the one before. Had nothing to read, was all alone, couldn't do anything without getting soaked, and the roar of the river and wind through the timber just about drove me bugs, so I put in most of my time sleeping. Finally the weather broke and I got out. Spent several days in trying to find the old man's Half Moon Lake, but couldn't get it spotted. I did find about 2 miles from camp up the river and about a mile from it a lake shaped like the letter S. On the creek coming out from the lower end I panned some pretty good colors, but as I figured, not enough to get excited about, yet an indication of gold in the country. Talk about a dead country, that sure is. There doesn't seem to be any life in there at all. You might spend all day in the timber without seeing a squirrel. I was getting sort of tired of beans, rice, and bacon, so I made my mind up I would go over to the ridge about 8 miles east of the S Lake and get a few grouse, as I thought I could hear a few hooters up there when I was at the head of this lake. I left come the next morning, which was a fine sunny day. I took only the rifle with me, and when I came to the ridge, sure enough, there were a few grouse hooting. I shot 2 and had gotten them when I bagged another one, which fell down the ridge about 100 yards before it hung up. While on my way down to pick it up, I found that piece of quartz. Up to that time, I had paid very little attention to what the country I was in looked like, as it was so heavily timbered and brushy. The formation didn't show up, and I had no tools with me to uncover it. The top of an old snag had broken off and fallen, scraping the top moss and loose dirt for a space of about 8 feet wide and 18 or 20 feet long, uncovering this quartz ledge, which is where I found this piece. This ledge was worked smooth by a glacier at one time. I couldn't find anything to break off a piece of it with, so I used the butt of my gun to get that piece. In doing so, I broke the stock of my gun, thus ruining it for further use. This didn't worry me any, as I knew there were not game in this country larger than a grouse, and a damn few of them. My first thought was of the richness of the quartz and of you fellas, and getting back to town to round you all up so we could get busy on it. After looking over and enjoying the feeling of knowing I had made a rich find, I covered the ledge up again with moss, limbs, and a rotten chunk of wood. Finishing that job, I thought I would climb the ridge directly over the ledge and get my landmarks so I could come back to it again and tell you where it was if anything should happen to me. This I did, climbing straight up over the ledge on the ridge till I reached the top, which was about 600 feet above where I found the ledge. I looked down below me and picked out a big tree with a bushy top, taller than the rest and about 50 feet to the right of the ledge. Looking over the top of this tree from where I stood, I could see out on Frederick Sound, Cape of the Straight Light, the point of Vanderpoot Spits, Point Vanderpoot, and turning a little to the left, I could see Sequoia Island, Kodiak Island, from the mouth of Wrangell Narrows. Satisfied with that, I turned half round to get back in sight of some mountain peaks, and lying below me on the other side of the ridge from the ledge was the Half Moon Lake that the Indian had told me about. Right there, fellas, I got the scare of my life. I hope to God I never see or go through the likes of it again. Swarming up the ridge towards me from the lake were the most hideous creatures. I couldn't call them anything but devils, as they were neither man nor monkey, yet looked like both. They were entirely sexless, their bodies covered with long, coarse hair, except where the scabs and running sores had replaced it. Each one seemed to be reaching out for me and striving to be the first to get me. The air was full of their cries, and the stench from their sores and bodies made me faint. I forgot my broken gun, and I tried to use it on the first ones, and then I threw it at them and turned and ran. God, how I did run. I could feel their hot breath on my back, their long claw-like fingers scraping my back. The smell from their steaming, stinking bodies was making me sick. With their noises they made, yelling, screaming, and breathing, drove me mad. Reason left me. How I reached the canoe or how I hung on to that piece of quartz is a mystery to me. When I came to, it was night, and I was laying in the bottom of my canoe, drifting between Thomas Bay and Sukhoi Island, cold, hungry, and crazy for a drink of water. But only to satisfy the latter urge I started for Wrangell, and here I am. You no doubt think I am crazy or lying. All I can say is, there is the quartz. Never let me hear name of Thomas Bay again, and for God's sake, help me get away tomorrow on that boat, please. So Charlie passed out from our lives. We put his story down as fantasy caused by loneliness and morbid thought. Alright, so there you guys go. What a crazy story that is, right? I mean, imagine that, being out in the wilderness, finding the gold that they're looking for, finding, you know, basically the mother lode, it sounded like, and then seeing those creatures, like, all coming towards you, like, wow. I mean, just put yourself in that position right there. Imagine that. Like, I can't even imagine what would be going through my mind. Nobody's around. You know, this is 1900 when this happened. You know, so the wilderness is still, like, really wild. Imagine having to run for your life away from those creatures. I mean, just imagine the stress and everything that that would cause. So, anyway, I thought that was a crazy story, and I thought I'd give it to you. I haven't heard that one before. I don't know if any of you guys have. If you haven't, you know, this is pretty crazy. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button for me. And if you're new, think about subscribing, trying to grow this channel. Leave me some comments. Let me know what you guys think about this story. You think this is all made up by this guy just out there lonely, like just going crazy? Or you think this really could have happened to him? Now, as I've shown you here, using Google Earth, here's the Half Moon Lake. There's the S Lake. There's the ridge. You know, everything he said in his story, basically I could find on Google Earth. So, you know, that kind of puts a lot of credence to the story if you ask me. Alright, hope you guys liked it. Remember, where there is a WILLSTAR, there is a way. And we'll see you guys later. Take care.